Welcome back to Boiler Wild. My name is Eric Johnson. On this podcast, talk about boiler industry topics as well as personal development. WILD stands for work hard, invest in yourself, lead others, and develop yourself into a person of excellence. Thank you for listening. I don't even know what episode we are on, but 30 something. And sorry for the week and a half break. I really need to start pre-recording and scheduling these. I had a crazy busy week, barely enough time to sleep, and I had to let a couple plates drop, and unfortunately the podcast was one of those plates, and I didn't have any pre-recorded episodes. I know some other podcasts, they'll release an episode once a week or twice a week, and they'll schedule it, and then they'll get way ahead. I kind of like releasing episodes as fast as I record them, especially with guests. I don't really like waiting to release them because I'm so excited about the episodes especially with people. And if I were only released 2 a week, then all of a sudden I'm getting episodes released and scheduling them for 2 months out, 3 months out, which is great on your end, but for consistency. But on my end, I want to get those podcasts out and get the conversation going and having a slow release schedule. I just don't think it benefits anybody. I was on a great podcast in early August of this year, and my episode still hasn't come out yet. That was a different podcast I was a guest on. And, that's up to the podcast hosts of, how they want to release it. But it is now October, and I did a podcast in early August, and it's not been released yet. So it's not what I want to do with this podcast. And I've been having a lot of thoughts about what I want to talk about for this one. And I had a couple posts kind of take off on LinkedIn, and I think we as a boiler industry, the experts or the people that are experienced in the industry always talk in generalities and kind of do the industry a disservice by saying how dangerous boilers are and everything. Yes, in theory, the boilers, steam, hydronics, burners, fire, combustion, yes, is dangerous. But I think we got to remain grounded in what actually is happening and not these what ifs or shoulda, woulda, coulda scenarios where people have accidents or mistakes. And, people say like, oh, you should have been more qualified, or this is why only qualified people do this, or, boilers don't learn on boiler systems until you're qualified and all this stuff. So in Baltimore, Maryland, a couple weeks ago, there was a small combustion accident on a boiler, little Burnham boiler. Seems like a delayed ignition. I made a post about it. It got real popular on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of people commenting, with the sentiment of, glad that nobody died, obviously, but this is a pretty relatively small boiler and small incident. It looks bad, but the burner just kind of folded out. Yes, it was probably a large pop, but it was just a little combustion delayed ignition. Not that it's not bad, but in terms of relative accidents for industrial accidents, even outside of boilers, it's a very small accident. And I don't know the status of the person that was working on it. The news article just said that they were injured, but not critical, and they went to the hospital. So that could be any bit of information, but hopefully the person is doing all right and will be able to learn from this. Another one I made about wiring a boiler, and there were some comments on that, and there seems to be this chicken and the egg scenario with boilers where the experienced people are, say, if you don't know what you're doing, don't work on boilers. Boilers are super dangerous, all this stuff. And I think they forget how they learned. And I think they forget what it's like to be new. So the industry on average uses on the job training most of the time. When you talk to companies, they say, oh, yeah, we got training. We do on the job training. That's fine to some level, but on the job training, you cannot have on the job training, but also say that somebody can't work on stuff until they're qualified. Well, that goes back to the definition of what is qualified. And I asked that question a while ago on LinkedIn. I never really got a good answer. That's a hard definition, because being qualified to do something, that you have to prove to somebody else that you're competent in that. And we as humans are imperfect beings, and even qualified people make mistakes. So I think there's this belief that people who are learning have to be qualified and cannot make a mistake before they work on a boiler system or, combustion, whatever. That's coming from the experienced people. Well, when you're new, and I can remember when I was new, when you are new, you almost have paralysis by analysis, and you are so afraid to make a mistake that you end up doing nothing. And if we were to, go back 20, 30, 40 years with, all the veterans of the industry now saying that boilers are so dangerous, inexperienced people shouldn't be working on it, you need to get proper training, all this stuff. That's great in theory, but I think they forget to remember how they learned. And I would venture to guess that a lot of them made a lot of mistakes that were never recorded on pictures on a phone, because they didn't have phones. We didn't have internet. We didn't have social media. And they forget and minimize those mistakes. And now 40 years, 30 years down the line, they preach this, you have to be an expert before you get started mentality, which can scare a lot of people and makes newer people believe that there's this secret that they have to learn and have to know before they even get started. And then they get frustrated because they can't figure out what that secret is. I think a lot of people are well-meaning in the industry when they're trying to learn. And I think we need to stay grounded in these huge what if scenarios of boilers are super dangerous and, don't work on them unless you know what you're doing. Yes, that is good from a very high level abstract view, but no matter how much you train somebody, you cannot train them in all scenarios. And even somebody who is qualified on paper and has gone to all the proper trainings will walk into situations in a boiler room and not know what they're doing and have to figure it out. And they will make mistakes, and they will not understand what they're doing and have to guess or call people. And I think there's people forget that, and they think that new people have to learn everything in every single scenario. I know a guy who used to work in the boiler industry. He was a carpenter, home contractor that kind of got into the industry. And he said to me that in 2 years, if he doesn't know everything, that he's going to give up. And his ideal way of learning, or what he thought what he was going to learn, was he was going to memorize every single scenario, every single part, every single thing, and on how it works and how it happens. And once he knows everything, then he can do something. And that's not reality. One, like, manufacturers are constantly releasing new equipment. And there's, even if you only work on boilers, the boiler industry, you can have small boilers in a local church or school, or you can have giant boilers in a factory or a utility plant. Like, those are two different industries, even though, both are boilers. And there's no way that somebody knows them both. And the person that works on utility boilers is no more qualified than the person who works on a smaller boiler. Just because somebody works on a larger boiler doesn't mean that they're going to know everything about smaller boilers. I think that's also that's a tangent, but there's a lot of people online, especially, that will make fun of people who work on smaller boilers. And small and large is relative, but they'll operate a boiler at a plant, 200,000 pound an hour water tube boilers. So then somebody will post like a 200 horsepower fire tube, and they're like, oh, that's cute. I remember my first water heater. Like, none of that is productive to the industry. Like, none of that, like, people can't control the boilers that they work on. And it's kind of a self-defeating attitude of, unless you work on the biggest boilers with the highest steam pressure, you're not, a real service technician or boiler operator or stationary engineer. Like, that's not true. And the people who work on giant boilers don't know everything about small boilers. It's not a build up aspect. Those boilers, while the physics are the same, the systems will be different. And if somebody that works on large utility boilers comes in to do a startup in a school system for a small hydronic plant with condensing boilers, I guarantee you they would be lost, because they don't know anything about condensing boilers. They barely know anything about hydronics because they're focused on steam. And that doesn't, they're not going to be any more qualified than the person who has gone to all the factory trainings for the hydronic boilers and who's done a bunch of startups for the hydronic boilers and who is focused on doing smaller startups. And they're the person that I would want doing it, not the person that works on larger utility boilers. They're each in their own lane, and just because you're an expert in your own lane doesn't mean you're an expert across the industry. But going back to my original thoughts, there was a comment on one of the posts on my LinkedIn. When it comes to boilers, it could level a large building. Call a pro. This is not your learning opportunity. At a holistic view, that is correct. Yes. When it comes to boilers, it could level a large building. Let's actually statistically think about this. The whole point of ASME, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, they developed the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code in 1917 in order to make boilers safer. And we have made boilers safer. Boilers used to blow up every single day through the 1800s, early 1900s. Boiler accidents used to be very common. Boilers also used to be used as tractors and in locomotives. So they were used more in society, but boiler accidents were very common. And as we learn more about metallurgy and as we learn more about welding, we started setting standards. And basically, boiler accidents only happen today due to human error and negligence, and not from construction. I think we've gotten the construction part down, and I don't see a boiler ripping in half because the welds were inferior or inferior metal was used. I'm sure it happens here and there, but nowhere near how much it happened a century ago and before that. So we've made great strides across the industry in terms of safety. And whenever somebody sees an accident and all this stuff, they always revert back to the, the hypothetical what if boiler explosion, oh, it could level a large building, it could kill tons of people. Yes, it could. But how often does it actually happen in the United States? Most boiler accidents that destroy a boiler end up being the boiler dry fires, and it gets swept under the rug. Somebody gets some cool pictures, they replace it, they do a repair, or you have a combustion incident like the Baltimore, Maryland one, and you change out the boiler, change out the burner, whatever, you do the repair and move on. Very rarely, I don't believe ever in the past recent history, has a boiler like leveled a building. It is possible. It's not reality. And when you constantly focus on these 1% of 1% scenarios, you scare people who are learning the industry, and they think they have to be an expert before they even get started. Going back to this comment, call a pro, this is not your learning opportunity. Yes. However, pros, so who is a pro? A pro is on the service side, somebody who works for a boiler service contractor or HVAC service contractor, and who has theoretically had the proper training and knowledge to work on a boiler. And then on the stationary engineering side, people who have gotten their license. But as if getting your stationary engineer license, that just proves that you can pass a test, and that doesn't prove that you're competent in every single scenario. If getting a stationary engineer's license was a check mark and that you are now a pro and know everything, you would never have an industrial accident when stationary engineers are involved. Same way they happen with service technicians. A service technician who works for a service company, yes, the service company is licensed. Yes, the service company hopefully employs people who are experienced and knowledgeable and have been around the block a couple times. But that doesn't automatically qualify the service technician. And it really matters who comes out to a service call. One person could be very qualified and have 20 years of experience, and the next person could be very new and have 2 years of experience. But they both work for the same company. So on paper, they're both a pro, but there's levels of being a pro. But to say that on-the-job training or doing your job is not a learning opportunity, that's absolutely false. Every single job, every single day is a learning opportunity. And if you think that you have to know everything before you actually get started, that's a perfectionist attitude, and that's not reality. If we had to train people to be perfect and to never make mistakes and to work in controlled environments before they actually saw boilers in the field by themselves and actually had to solve problems by themselves, we would never get anywhere. And I think it's a very limiting factor in our industry because people constantly highlight this very, very little 1% of 1%, what could happen, this big could, and they don't actually look at the statistics. And let me tell you the statistics, and I don't have anything directly for boilers, but let me tell you what happens every single day, and nobody even gets a thought to it. So when you get in your car and drive somewhere, nobody even gives it a second thought. And that shouldn't be reality. If we treated cars the same way as we treated boilers, everybody that would get in their car would be very scared. In 2023, the United States had around 41,000 car accident deaths in 2023 and about 43,000 in 2024. So on average, let's say there's 40,000 car accident deaths. Yes, and per capita, there's more cars than boilers and everything, but you are more likely to get injured on your way to work or die on your way to work and coming home from work than you are on the job. So then if we go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics for 2023, there were 5,283 fatal work injuries recorded in the United States. But if we break down those statistics, construction had the most, 1,075. Most of them were from falls to a lower level. So somebody fell from a height of 6 to 30 feet. Transportation, warehousing had the second most fatalities, 930. But transportation incidents are the most frequent type of fatal event, accounting for 36.8% of all occupational fatalities in 2023. But without breaking down those numbers anymore, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 5,283 fatal fatalities. And that's 5,283 more than should be happening. But we don't live in a perfect world, and stuff is going to happen, unfortunately. However, we, on average, kill 40,000 people in the United States from cars. So why don't we treat car accidents and commuting to work as more dangerous than actually working? Because it is. It technically is. And I would venture to guess that service technicians have more injuries and more time off of work from commuting accidents than actual on-the-job accidents. In my experience, I can think of easily 10 examples of where service technicians got injured or were in accidents on their way to work or on their way home. And, it's the same with stationary engineers. Stationary engineers are going to drive to the same place. But, if you're a stationary engineer and you work a 12-hour shift, how attentive are you to drive 30 minutes home from a 12-hour shift, especially if you are on nights or if you're on swing shift and, you work if you were doing days and then you do nights, how attentive are you to actually drive 12 hours after a 12-hour shift? Probably not great. And, a lot of people say, oh, I did it for 10 years. I haven't gotten in an accident. Well, that doesn't mean it's not more dangerous. You're not more likely to get in an accident. It's just a matter of time. Nobody plans on getting into an accident. But going back to the boiler industry, I don't think we're doing us any favors by, one, the experienced people acting like boilers are blowing up every single day, and that there's this level of expertise that you have to achieve before you do anything. If on-the-job training is going to be the primary training source of the industry, which it is, not that that's a good thing, but it currently is, on-the-job training is the number one training source of the industry, and that normally involves a newer person working with a more experienced person. The problem with that is that newer person will never be able to work with that experienced person long enough and to work through every single scenario where they know everything. You will eventually have to set them loose and they will be unprepared for the job. There is no amount of training and no amount of books that you can give them and no amount of support that you can give them that they're going to be prepared for everything. And as long as they remain within the guidelines of, general electrical safety, general combustion safety, people know, I think, when they're doing something dangerous, if they have any level of a little bit of training, and especially when you're working for a contractor or as a stationary engineer, like, what you should or should not be doing. And this belief that you just have to know everything and you have to have 10 years experience before you even get started, it's not helpful to anybody. And you might say, oh, well, nobody believes that. Well, I see it all the time on Facebook or in talking to people or LinkedIn, especially in my comments recently, in that people have to have experience before they get experience. And it goes back to the chicken and egg scenario. And what are new people supposed to do? How are they supposed to learn if we expect perfection as more experienced people, and when they cause a mistake, or they burn up a transformer or something, oh well, you just don't know any better. Well, you're not experienced, you shouldn't have made that, you should know better. And you know who are we to say that when you are more experienced, but I can guarantee you burned up brand new parts, or you've changed brand new parts and they weren't the problem. I guarantee you still do it. Just because you're experienced doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And treating boilers like they're some kind of special entity where only the most privileged people of privileged people that walk on water can work on them, and that there's this secret or magic that you have to know before you can work on them to be deemed qualified, it doesn't do the industry any service. And I think that doesn't help new people who come into the industry or who look at it, who are in HVAC and want to work on boilers. They see boilers as a super dangerous thing. Boilers are bombs and they're about to blow up at any minute. And yes, technically, but cars are missiles. And theoretically, some paint on a concrete surface is all that separates a 6,000-pound missile from another 6,000-pound missile on the road. So why don't we treat driving the same way that we treat these, what if talks about boilers? And you go drive to the store, you don't say your prayers and kiss your loved ones goodbye and say, "Oh, I'm driving to the store. Oh, hope I come back. Oh, it's super dangerous." It is super dangerous. Driving is super dangerous. But with boilers, we seem to treat that like that boilers and are like this crazy thing. Boilers have their dangers, but you mitigate them through safety and controls. And the industry on average is very, very safe. And when you stay within those guidelines of safety, you will probably be okay. But telling people that are new that they have to be experienced and that learning on boilers is not the place to learn, or always call a pro, that is great in theory, but there's, like I said, to wrap this up, no amount of training and scenario based learning and support and job shadowing, on the job training will prepare somebody for every single situation for every single type of boiler, for steam, hydronic systems, to deal with all the parts. That's just not realistic. And if we lived forever as humans, maybe you could get there, but we don't. And unfortunately, we have to train people in the industry as fast as possible due to a large shortage of people. And bringing in new people and then treating them like they can't make a mistake. And when they do make a mistake, that the experienced people have never made mistakes and there's no room for mistakes. And they have to do everything perfect the way that you want to do it, or the way you think it should be done, but then you don't explicitly tell them exactly and what it is or how you think it should be done. And that there's this moving standard of perfection that just happens to so align with your work ethic and your worldview, and that you as an experienced person are, so experienced and so knowledgeable that you don't make mistakes and that you never made mistakes, but you are forgetting when you learned. I guarantee you made mistakes. I can think of all the times I made mistakes. It's your ability to make corrections and overcome those mistakes is what makes you a great problem solver, and mistakes you learn from. But with the age in 2025 of labor is super expensive and parts are even more expensive, mistakes are not tolerated. And when people make mistakes, they're seen as less than, or, oh, you should have known better, or, oh, you need more training, or all this stuff. Yes, that is probably true, but at a certain point in time, you have to let somebody go, and they will feel unsupported, and they will feel like they're going to make mistakes and that they don't know everything, and that is normal. Nobody knows everything, and just because somebody is more experienced doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes. And, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, this doesn't happen, I have it in my DMs, I see it in my comments, I see it on posts. Experienced people treat inexperienced people in the industry like they need to be experienced before they have experience. It goes back to chicken and the egg scenario, and treating boilers like they're this some dangerous entity that is, like I said, only people that walk on water and are holier than thou, only those people can work on them. And if you make mistakes, or if you don't know everything, don't work on boilers. That's great, but you're going to be one of if you think like that, you're going to be one of the few people who work in the industry, and everybody else will have left, and you'll be overworked and wondering why you can't train anybody and bring anybody up, because you never take the time to mentor and lead people and allow them to make mistakes. People are going to make mistakes. New people, no matter how much experience they have, whenever you do something new or go into a problem when there are multiple variables like a boiler room. Boiler rooms have thousands of data points that could all change at a single time. And, as a service technician or a stationary engineer looking at a problem in a boiler room and saying, all right, what are we doing here? Most problems, you can identify and, figure out and learn from, but you can't train for every single mistake. And, think we as an industry need to stop talking about the 1% of 1% accidents and expecting that everybody be an expert before they even touch a boiler. The reality of it is people are going to work on a boiler that are not super great at electrical troubleshooting or aren't super confident with combustion. And you know how you get better at that is by doing more of it and making a couple mistakes and burning up a transformer or popping a couple fuses. That's how you get better at it, and along with proper training. But you will make mistakes. You will not know everything. And when you open an electrical panel and you're like, oh man, I don't know what I'm doing, let me try to figure this out. And, you make a couple mistakes along the way, but you get it done. That's how people have experienced. That's how they learned. Everybody makes mistakes, but you're no different just because you are experienced and you think that now that you're experienced and you think that you know everything, that nobody else can make mistakes now. But you made mistakes, so stop acting like boilers are this crazy dangerous thing that, once again, you have to have experience before you get experience. So that's what I have for today. That's kind of been what I've been thinking about for the last week as I've been crazy busy doing other things. But those couple posts on LinkedIn that kind of got popular, and seeing some comments and seeing I've seen other comments on social media, and I've talked with people, and, they just don't understand, like, oh, this younger generation, they just don't get it. Like, and it just comes back to this. People are going to make mistakes, and new people, if you treat boilers and steam systems, if you treat them like everything's about to just blow up like a bomb, the second you do something bad and you have to know everything before you do something, they get paralyzed and they get scared, and nobody wants to be in that situation. And then they say, oh, this isn't for me, or, then they get frustrated with their employer. They get frustrated with you, and they stop pursuing boilers. They leave the industry. They go to HVAC. They say, hey, this isn't for me. These people think that they walk on water or are super special, and, that's not the case. And this isn't for me, and I want to be around somewhere where I can learn and be appreciated. And that is fair. But we as an industry, we cannot train boiler service technicians, stationary engineers if we have that attitude and the people with experience have that attitude. I am all for making mistakes within reason. There's no room to make dumb mistakes from uneducated people working on boilers. But as long as you know some general guidelines and you have some general training, you are going to make mistakes. And as long as you generally understand the rules, you are all good to make mistakes in my book, because making mistakes is how you learn. I made mistakes and I made it. You can too. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And if you are experienced, don't tell others that they can't make mistakes and that they have to be a pro before they're a pro. Be safe out there. Treat your commute time to work or driving time. Treat it like 40,000 people a year in the United States die, and don't treat the boiler industry like 40,000 people die from boiler accidents, because they don't. Boilers are very safe. Act like it, and you will stay safe, and always look out for others, but don't be afraid to make mistakes within reason, and get training when you can and when it's offered, but you will never know everything, and that's okay. Thank you for listening. I will have a couple more episodes. I got I think 2 guests lined up this week, which I'm super excited about. If you want to be on this podcast, you can message me on LinkedIn or email me, eric.johnson@boilearn.com, BOILEARN. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate the couple of people who have reached out and said that they enjoy the podcast. I'm doing my best here. If you have anything you want me to talk about or any topics or anything, please reach out. If you enjoy this podcast, please rate it 5 stars on the app that you listen to, either on Spotify or Apple. I appreciate that as well. That helps me out really well. I appreciate everybody who listens to this. I know the podcasts I do myself aren't always the most informative or fun. I know guests are fun, but I kind of like working through my thoughts by myself on this podcast and really trying to get some topics narrowed down and try to communicate those better. As I really started this podcast to try to communicate better with people and to learn how to speak better. And speaking by myself and having a one-way conversation is hard. And there's a reason why only 1% of podcasts get to 21 episodes, because it's hard to stick with something, especially when nobody's listening. But I do have listeners. I appreciate every single message of people reaching out. It's very, very encouraging to know that a couple of people are listening. I see the download numbers and everything, so I know people are listening. But when people message me, those messages are the highlight of my day, because this podcast, I'm not getting famous. There's no fame and fortune on the other side of this podcast. The world doesn't want a podcast about boilers, but I think boilers are cool, and that the boiler industry is a very cool space, and that everybody that works in the industry has an awesome job, and we have a lot of opportunity in the future, especially with this AI changing the landscape of the job industry and the job market. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I don't think we need to apologize ever for being interested in a industry and equipment that seems weird to other people outside of it. So thank you for listening, and stay wild.